Good morning, everyone. So we'll just move straight into the presentation. Can you change the slide, please? So to just give you some context, as you know, small island developing states in the Caribbean are very much dependent on the ocean for income generation, and we are no different. So we have always relied on our coastal and ocean resources for economic prosperity, primarily energy, tourism, and fisheries. And in our quest to diversify our economy, we spoke about expanding in our tourism sector, our agricultural sector, and our maritime sector. And all of this requires healthy ocean. So just to give you some context, in 2015, our GDP from just on our immediate coastline GDP generated was estimated at $2 billion US. And for the wider coastal zone, which goes up to the EEZ exclusive economic zone, it was $22 billion, so 81% of our total GDP. And 89% of the total value of physical assets lies within the broader coastal zone, inclusive of the ECZ. Together, Trinidad and Tobago has 704 kilometers of coastline, and our ocean space is 15 times larger than our land space. So, of course, this indicates how important our ocean is for our own development. Next slide, please. So back in 2010, at the IMA, we started to realize that we were basically documenting the demise of our coastal and marine environment. Ocean environment. So what we did is we lobbied the government to develop an integrated coastal zone policy for us to address some of these impacts. And one of our major concern was adapting to the impacts of climate change. So in 2012, a steering committee was appointed to develop this policy framework, strategies, and action plan. And how we approached it is that we basically went out to the public. We had 19 consultations throughout Trinidad and Tobago, both at the community level, at the stakeholder group level, and with the media, to basically ask folks, what do you think needs to be addressed in an integrated coastal zone policy? What are your concerns, and so forth? So based on these consultations back in 2012-2013, a draft policy was prepared and submitted in 2014. Of course, then we had some changes, and in 2017, an interministerial committee was appointed to actually finalize the policy through a public consultative process and implement. So with regards, so we're at that stage now where the amended policy has been resubmitted to the Ministry of Planning and Development. Next slide, please. So in terms of ICZM in Trinidad, the overall policy goal is to facilitate an integrated approach to coastal zone management aimed at maintaining and, where necessary, enhancing the functional integrity of the coastal resource systems while enabling sustainable economic development through rational, inclusive decision-making and planning. So, of course, part of the goal here is the sustainable economic development and looking at the blue economy in particular. So one of the first things we had to do in developing the policy was to define our coastal zone. Next slide, please. We had no definition for our coastal zone within any of our policy or legislation. And what we did, because we understood that most of the impacts on our coastal zone actually comes from land-based sources, we had the boundaries, we demarcated boundaries in terms of impact. So on the landward side, we had the area of immediate impact, and that was along the coast as the area in red. And a lot of that looked at, in case of storm surge, which areas would be most vulnerable. And then, of course, the area of influence, which is the pinkish area, it looks pink to me, that's the area where we have most of our activity that would eventually lead into the coastal zone, all our runoff and so forth, that goes into the coastal zone and impact the coastal zone. On the seaward side, we had three boundaries. We delineated three boundaries. Zone of immediate impact, and we got that out of the definition. We got that from the EMA Act in terms of water pollution rules, in terms of the immediate impact zone. Then, of course, our territorial sea and our exclusive economic zone. So earlier on, when I talked about the wider coastal zone 81% of our revenue, GDP in 2015 being generated is from that entire EEZ, where we have a lot of our oil and gas exploration. Next slide, please. So with regards to the policy framework, strategies, and action plan, the policy itself has 11 objectives, and under each objective there are strategies, and it speaks to things like protected areas that was discussed previously, and meeting our international obligation under conventions and so forth, as well as transboundary issue. Under objective 2, we have the objective is to design and manage development in the coastal zone to be in harmony with the aesthetics, environmental, and cultural attributes of the island. And under that, one of the strategies to promote marine spatial planning in the coastal zone. And then another objective is to alleviate poverty in the coastal zone through proactive development initiative that generates sustainable livelihood options. And we have here 3 objectives: integrate coastal zone planning efforts with existing national plan and economic development framework, identify and promote opportunities for sustainable economic development in the coastal zone, and to design and implement an awareness, education, and training program focused on sustainable coastal zone livelihoods. So we have the overarching integrated coastal zone policy framework, but the intention is that you have the overarching policy, but you have to do regional plans within each of the regional local government bodies or regional corporation. You develop local integrated coastal zone management plans, as well as marine spatial planning. And the reason for that is because, again, we want to take into consideration how the land use and the land based impacts also impact on the ocean. So instead of being separate, that it should be done together. So back in 2018, we started, next slide please, we started a little pilot project here in Chaguaramas, right? Chaguaramas is a very interesting place. So the Northwest Peninsula, so the entire Northwest Peninsula actually, that starts by the mouth of the Diego Martin River. And reason for that, within this small area, we have a myriad of activities, including traditional fishing, the yachting sector, the commercial shipping sector like Caradoc. You have promotion of tourism, bathing beach, the boardwalk, so forth. And you have planned and unplanned housing. And one of the big concerns in this area, of course, is land reclamation. So these are just some of the pictures. And it's very interesting that within a small area, you have these big housing developments, and you have all this unplanned development that people don't see from the road. And you can see from the photo there that at high tide, I think that house is probably flooded. Okay, next slide, please. So this is just an idea to give you what the land cover was within the Northwest Peninsula. And you would see, especially as you go further west, a lot of the urban activity is along the coast. A lot of the forest in that area is protected, right? The big red area, that's Diego Martin. And on the other map, you would see there's a lot of reclaimed land, some legal plan and some illegal. And that's a big problem here, because when there's reclamation taking place, access to the ocean is blocked. Okay, next slide. So within the Chaguaramas area, some of our priority areas that we identify that needs to be considered are the anchoring and mooring areas for commercial and recreational use, land reclamation, land-based and ocean-based pollution. We have regular occurrences of oil spills and fish kills, or reports of oil spills and fish kills in this area. We spoke about appropriate coastal development, what type of development we should have along the coast, and whether that development is suitable. You know, does it need a marine front, that type of development. Fishing areas and landing sites, habitat protection and restoration, example of seagrass beds. So the last remaining dense thalassius seagrass beds were found here on the Northwestern Peninsula, and they've disappeared. The thalassia dominated, they're no longer here. A lot of it has to do with land-based sources of pollution, sedimentation, that is also coming from land reclamation. So we've lost those habitats, and those habitats are very important as nurseries for fish. We also spoke improve access to areas. So of course, the public access to the coast is limited. Most of us, if we drive around, we remember when we were little and we were coming to Chaguaramas to go to the beach, you saw the coast, you saw the ocean. Now you very rarely see the ocean. You get little pockets because most of it has been reclaimed. And with that, access to the coastline has also been limited. Of course, there's use of conflicts, and that's a big problem down here with the fishers, the yachters, the yachties, as well as with the industrial sector. Then we have to talk about climate change adaptation and, of course, governance issue. Next slide. So with regards to the governance issue, we have to look at the importance of political support and the legal framework for marine spatial planning implementation. We need to understand the context and the mechanisms in place in terms of formal and informal governance, who has responsibility, which agencies, and so forth. Identify all the government institutions and stakeholders that play a role in this area. As mentioned before, it has to be very consultative and participatory, and you really want to build consensus among the different stakeholders. Sometimes it's always great to have a champion, which is a key factor of success, someone, whether it's in the government, pushing this effort forward. And then a cross-sectoral coordination mechanism is key. So next slide. So where we are. So we need to understand in developing this plan and going forward where we are. We have to examine the power relationship and the governance process, as I mentioned before. In Chaguaramas, you have the CDA being responsible for managing the land, but they will tell you they just manage up to the sea. Anything in the ocean, you have to call Commissioner of State Land or Maritime Services Division. Then you have some overarching responsibility between the CDA and the Martin Regional Corporation. So the CDA has its plan, the regional corporation has its own plan. So all those kind of issues you have to look at. You have to identify the strengths and the weaknesses in past and current areas of governance, and you have to trace how human activities and environmental conditions have changed over the years, and how the governance system has responded or not responded to these changes. So people will tell you in Chaguaramas you have a lot of development occurring along the coast, and how does the governance structure, how has that responded to this change? And you also have to look at where we want to go. So to do that, we have to identify present and future competing interests, identify the issues to be addressed and desired outcome vision. Some of these issues we would have identified already. Select and involve key partners for MSP implementation. We started the process in terms of having one-on-one meetings with key stakeholders, and then we had a stakeholder consultation where we brought everybody in so that we know what we're talking about and everybody's on the same page. And then, of course, understanding the capacity needs through our planning and implementation. We spend a lot of resources on the planning phase, but many times we have no resources left over for the implementation phase. So we have to be cognizant of that. And moving forward, next slide, please. We have to build a vision, and to do that, we have to think about these questions. What does the perfect world look like for the Northwest Peninsula in 20 years? What would you like the condition of the resources to be? What would you like the economic conditions to be? What would you like the social and cultural conditions to be? And what would you like to leave for future generations? One of the things we started the consultation meetings back in 2017, and then 2018 we focused, between 2018 and 2019 we focused on the consultations to finalize the ICCM policy, and we were hoping to start back the MSP process earlier this year. However, due to the COVID and the fact that we couldn't keep any meetings and so on, things got delayed. So we've just restarted, and we hope to start again consultations in the new year. So one of the vision statements we had put out for persons to consider at the time is coastal communities along the Northwest Peninsula of Trinidad are economically stable due to multiple environmentally sustainable and harmonized economic activities. So that's just one of the visions that we put out there to get feedback on as to what we want to see with regards to marine spatial planning on the Northwest Peninsula. So with that said, thank you very much.